everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Sheethal, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Spendflo. So before we jump into the webinar and the topic, I just want to give you a little bit of an introduction about Spendflo, what we do. So Spendflo is basically a SaaS buying and management solution for basically the software as a service industry. So we manage, renew, and buy SaaS subscriptions for high growth companies. So in the last few years, we have about approximately 29% of saving SaaS spends for all of our customers. So basically, in other words, if you're looking to optimize your cost, then Spendflo is the place for you. With that being said, we have Rob today, the CFO of Bayzat, join us for a very interesting topic, which is basically financial leadership in a rapidly changing world. So as you know, the world is at a different pace all over today, and technology and innovation, they're increasingly interconnected today. And this by default sort of has like a profound impact on businesses, which indirectly has like a premium on finance leaders. And I think that's why we have Rob today to sort of like shed some light on discussing the topics in this vertical and in these areas of discussion. So Rob, we'd like to know more about you. So over to you.
Thanks, Sheethal, and a pleasure to be here. Yeah, for myself, I'm an Irish trained chartered accountant. Started my career in KPMG before I jumped into the startup world. I had a brief dalliance with the PLC world in the middle of all that, and I'm squarely back in the startup space at the moment in my third startup with Bayzat. It's my first CFO role in Bayzat, and it's been a world of learnings and a world of pain at the same time, like you go through in any startup. Last night I was reflecting on the topic for today and rapidly changing world, and it's interesting when you think about the last couple of years, and I've never seen kind of a world advance and change and pivot so much in the last couple of years. So before COVID, the world was progressing at a lovely state. Everything was going really well. And then COVID brought the world to a freeze immediately and changed the entire corporate landscape. Finance became a survival function for most businesses. We came out of that into a boom, the likes of which we haven't seen from such a low to such a high. That came with high interest rates and inflation fears. Now we're into recession fears. We have the venture capital community entering a quasi-catatonic state where they're not investing and they're too uncertain, which is then, causing startups to enter kind of life support phases. And on top of that, we have a war in Ukraine. So the world in the last 3 to 4 years has changed like I've never seen before, and I think many, many people have never seen before. And that's before you even get to the corporate transformations around digital transformation, working from home. We've seen a significant rise in sustainability. Regulatory landscapes have evolved and continue to do so very, very quickly. Compliance, banking, taxes, and data privacy. We have global tax alignment. We even in the UAE now have corporate tax entering the space. And just this morning, the UAE announced a huge shakeup to the pension landscape. So the world has changed in ways in 3 years that I think nobody could have imagined. It's amazing and scary at the same time. And I think the one thing, that sits in the back of my mind constantly is we're far from done with this pace of change. I think this pace of change will continue. And we're going to see a lot more of this in the future to come.
Awesome. No, that's definitely there, Rob. I think it's super overwhelming at the same time to sort of like put on like your CFO hat and like sort of juggle between multiple things, right? It's not just about financial health in an organization anymore. It's about keeping yourself updated and like trying to navigate through the risk management itself in today's business world, right? I mean, it was quite interesting when you told me that you started off with like your big fours, and then now you're as like in a startup. So that brings me to my very first question, which is like some of the past experiences through your journey, right, as a person. So what of those led you to be a finance leader? I think that's something that we were curious about.
Yeah, great question. I think there's these amazing pivot moments in your career that you only realize when you reflect on them and look back. And for me, that moment was when I left KPMG and I joined my first startup, Property Button. I left the warm embrace of a big four, very steady, predictable,
Through the stable.
business, exactly, into the hot boiling water of a 25-person startup, fighting for survival every month. And I left as a manager in KPMG to become the head of finance. So I left, a good role with, okay responsibility into leading a function at whatever, 24, 25, and trying to understand, okay, everything I do, everything I decide has a huge impact on this business. It drives profitability, revenue, growth, direction. And that is a huge change, and takes realization and engagement to go, okay, what I'm doing today is far more important, even though the scale and the clients that I'm working with are very different from a big four. But the impact you're having on that organization is far outsized to what you were having previously.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that was the pivot moment in my career when I realized I love this. This is what gets me out of bed in the morning. It is the most difficult thing I do. From a PLC or a big four into a startup, I think they're incredibly difficult. And they suit certain people, and if they suit you, my God, do they suit you? Because the impact you can have, the career acceleration you get from it, the responsibility. Because in the startup, there's so much happening all at the same time that everyone has got to be trusted. You can't have people in a startup that you do not trust, because every single person has an outsized impact on that business. And that's that opportunity. But at the same time as having that opportunity and that challenge comes the flip side of that, which is everything is on fire all at once. And if you enjoy that and the ability to pick through and find the things that you're gonna firefight and solve, you can do anything you want in a startup, right? But that kind of analogy is important, because there's a health warning here. Startups aren't for everyone. That's okay. Once you get behind the veil of the glitz and the glamour of the external marketing, all startups are the same. We're all fighting. We're all striving for success, and that means fires and challenges and uncertainty. And if you know that, and you accept that, and you work within that, you can have an amazing career in startups. So that moment, stepping into Property Button and realizing, I love this style of business, was the most important pivot moment in my career so far.
That's great. That's super inspiring, Rob, because I think you rightly mentioned, right, saying that startups isn't really for everyone. But I feel like one day you wake up and you realize you're calling, and you are aware of the fact that you have to juggle between multiple things. So that is definitely inspiring for me, especially when you said that, you were a part of a team at KPMG, and then by say 25, 26, you are to lead a team now, and then multiple challenges, multiple responsibilities, and like you said, trust people within your startup as well. I think it's not just sort of an educational skill that you have. It's also some of the skills that you build on your own as well, just with your exposure and experience. That's brilliant. Just to follow up on the question. So I'm sure it would have been a super new experience for you to just move from a very stable, secure sort of a job, and then put on your hat as a CFO, right, with Bayzat. So I'm guessing you've been there for a few months now, or year. And then what would you sort of say you knew in your first 30 or 60 days as a CFO that you knew, so that you would sort of would have been already prepared already? Some things that, hey, you know what? I thought of this. Maybe if this would have worked differently, it would have been I mean, there's no perfect sense, but then if it's a perfect world of being a CFO in the first 30, 60 days as your as the role on.
There's no perfect 30 or 60 days, and there certainly is no perfect start in a startup.
That's true.
Let alone a larger, more structured corporate. For me, I was incredibly fortunate to join, Bayzat, who has the best culture I've ever worked within. So, I was off to a really good start, because culture was extraordinary, the trust is extraordinary. The CEO gave me the latitude to poke and prod and look into different areas without any hesitation or any limitation. And that has its pros and cons, right? He gave me a really, really long leash, but that works for me. So I was very fortunate on that angle. And then I think, I don't think there's anything I wish I knew going in. There's things I wish I did differently in the first 60 days. And, it's the age-old thing you always hear, right? When you start a new job, particularly in a leadership role, listen, and listen more. Park everything and listen more again. And, I think you've got to listen, you've got to write it all down, you've got to give yourself time to digest what you're hearing, particularly in a startup, in a high growth environment where there's a lots of change happening. You have to learn the historical stuff, why you're here, how you got here. You've got to learn what's on the roadmap. What are we doing next in the next 12 months? What are the strategic priorities for each of the different teams? What are your own strategic priorities and how do you fit into those? And if you don't give yourself time to digest those, you'll make mistakes in the first 60 days because you won't know enough to make an informed decision. Because as a CFO, your decisions have huge impact across the business. You can drive, whether it's a 25-man business like Property Button was, or Bayzat, which is 350 people, your decisions have outsized impact, and you have to realize that. So you have to be more informed. And despite knowing this, I made mistakes. So my first 60 days, I have a bias for action, and I really have to control it. And I fell victim to it. I saw something, I thought it was small around our AP kind of stuff, and I wanted to implement a project. I saw it within 3 weeks. I was like, okay, we're going to do this. I got the finance team to build it in-house, and then we pushed it out to the rest of the business. And I was totally wrong, because Bayzat's culture is closer to a democracy than anything else I've seen. And I didn't realize that properly. So I thought, okay, we need this in finance, so everyone else needs to do it. But I didn't explain that correctly, and I didn't engage with the rest of the business to explain why this is so important, how we'd like to do it, and take their feedback in a way that also works for them. And the project didn't work because I didn't listen enough at the start to realize not just that the project was required, it is and continues to be needed, but I didn't listen enough to understand how everyone else would like to play into that and how they would like it to work, so that their workflow is not interrupted by finance pushing something on them. And if I had listened more, like I should have, in the first 30 and 60 days, I would have got that project off the ground in the first 90 days. So learning all the time and reminding myself, even now, over a year into this job, I need to listen more and I need to be a better listener.
Yeah, I think that's so important. That's so valid, right? Like the more you listen, the more knowledge you gain. And as they say, KT, right? Knowledge transfer. The more knowledge that you get. So like, just around those lines. So you've been like part of the big fours, and then like the startup scene, and then your career path. Like obviously, I was going through your LinkedIn, and I was just seeing that it's been phenomenal, right? Like you were like a CA. You have like that validation there, and then you're like been like a team member, then a team player, a team lead, and then boom, you're into like the CFO role, right? So how has that shift been for you? Like you clearly explained with the culture of Bayzat, and like how you have team on the same plans, and like how you sort of like help make decisions, but today you're the person sort of like making those decisions as such. So I was just wondering, like how has that shift been for you, like from moving from like a big four, like be it a team member, a team lead, and then now to sort of like owning and taking responsibilities of those decisions, when be it whether it's crucial times or like just a few years ago, like it could have been like a great ride. So
yeah, for me, I've thoroughly enjoyed that transition, and I found it to be more seamless than anything else. And I think that comes back to how I lead teams. I view myself as an enabler more than a leader. My job is to create the environment for my team to succeed. It's not about me succeeding. I am irrelevant. If my team is not succeeding, then we are not succeeding. And that's how I like to lead the team. So I found that super empowering. And the tricky part within that is creating the right culture for that team to thrive and succeed and step up. But really for me as well, I think over the last couple of years, through the different startups, I've really enjoyed the freedom and the challenge that comes with a startup. And I find that journey through the different startups really, really enjoyable. But I also think the challenge, of shifting into startups and more senior leadership positions within startups is that the responsibility on the difficult side of life in a startup is very draining, is very challenging. I remember being in Property Button and 24 hours before payroll having 5,000 euros in our bank account multiple times and having to beg and borrow from clients to make sure we made payroll the next day. And on top of that, in other startups, not just one startup, multiple startups, we've missed payroll, and that's part of the life of a startup, and it is an awful part of the journey, but it's part of it. And as the finance leader and now the CFO, you are the face of that. Unapologetically, that is your job to shoulder that burden. And for the fun stuff, I guess on one side there is this very serious, very challenging part of transitioning into a leadership position in a startup. You generally don't have those challenges in a PLC or a Big Four. You have your cash flow and you're pretty solid in general. Whereas in a startup, it's the inverse. You often face that challenge among many other financial challenges. But that's your biggest responsibility as any finance leader in a startup is your team. You got to make sure they're paid, and sometimes you can't. And that is the one thing I found the hardest transitioning into the startup world from the Big Four and the PLCs.
Awesome, thanks. So as we're discussing, I would also like to let the audience know, please feel free to sort of like drop in your questions if you have any for Rob, so we can definitely pick that up during this webinar as well. So as you were saying, Rob, like initially when you sort of like introduced yourself, you were talking about not just the rapid changes with technology and innovation, it's also about like the whole sort of like dynamics the world has been through, right? With respect to COVID and then the war and all of that. So there comes my next question, where I wanted to know, how is it to be a CFO pre-COVID versus post-COVID? And what does it actually take for a CFO to sort of like thrive in today's world, right? And yeah, I would love to sort of like hear that from you.
I don't necessarily think anything has materially changed, right, in terms of the requirements. I think they just become elevated or more significant. So, and this comes to how I operate, right? But my view is, to be a successful CFO, you need to have empathy, transparency, and vulnerability. And I think without these, it's very, very hard to succeed, because a startup is a team environment. It is not an I environment. But when I say these key attributes, I'm assuming that if you've made it to the CFO role, you're technically talented, you have investor management skills, you make data-driven decisions. So I'm not ignoring that. I'm assuming you've come with those fundamentals. But to be a truly gifted leader, and I'm far from this at the moment. I am still learning, right? But empathy, transparency, and vulnerability create or give you the ingredients to create a truly great team. Because a CFO is nothing without the team that he works with. In fact, you work for that team, because they do the hard yards. You make the decisions alongside them, but they are the driving force. And I think you need your team far more than they need you. And if I say nothing else on this interview, that I think is the most important takeaway from today. Be a successful CFO, you have to realize that your team is far more important than you are as the CFO. And I think these things have become elevated since COVID, right? With the remote working world, the flexibility people expect, you have to trust your team more than pre-COVID, exponentially more. And if you can't give your team the trust that they need to be successful, they won't give you their trust. And if you don't have their trust, you are nothing, and you will not succeed as a CFO in any startup world. And trust, the way that the trust comes from the team to you is, one is obviously your ability to do your job, but two is your ability to be transparent and vulnerable to your team. I sat on day one with my team, and I asked all of them that we trust each other and that we give each other trust. We don't earn trust, right? And so on day one, I gave everyone my trust. I said, you have it. Unequivocally, you have it. With limitations, right? Don't break my trust, but you have it. You don't have to earn it. And I said to them, if you work best at 2 a.m., I don't mind. If you work best on a weekend, I don't mind. What I care about is that if you give me a deadline, you hit the deadline with a high quality of work. And if you're not going to hit the deadline, you tell me well in advance. And those are the key requirements I have for my team. Everything else is secondary. And then if they want to take annual leave, go, I don't mind. Take 2 weeks, work from India, Australia, the US. But I expect that your work is done or managed and handed off appropriately. And I'm not going to check because I trust you. But break that trust, and that's a red line for our team. And we all know that because we're transparent on that. And we trust each other. And we've all made mistakes in the last year. I certainly have with that, but we've talked about it openly. We've been transparent. We've been vulnerable about it. And the team has gotten stronger. And the final thing I said to them on the very first day, and something I think is very important is we're all adults in this world, and we will all leave companies at different times for different reasons. And I really want my team to be transparent about that. I want them, as much as they can be open about it, because I said to them, and I really mean this for my team, if they're on this call, is that I will open my contact book for you. I will support you, because I really view my job is to make them successful both within Bayzat and in their next job. And if I can do that, I know I get the best out of them and they get the best out of me. And that's part of the journey, right? A job today is not for life. It is for 1 year or 5 years. And we have to recognize that, and we have to work with our teams to do that. And it all comes back to my job is to serve my team, not the other way around. And everything I do is about supporting them, which makes us collectively better.
Yeah, I think I really picked this up from the last time we spoke, right, about being an enabler rather than being a leader. I think that's like sort of like stuck with me in my head. I think that's so very important, especially in today's world, because be it COVID or whatever the changes that are happening in the world today, it's sort of like indirectly impacting the team members and the people of the company. And I think people of the company really speak for the success of the company as well. So a couple of weeks back, I was just reading this book on organizational health, which really talks about how, you can have like strategic teams, initiatives, and like marketing teams, your sales team, your like analytics team, but all of this can sort of be measured, and like we are given like more importance to that. But where we're sort of like lacking as like organizations or individuals is that we don't really focus on organizational health, which is most of the things that you said. And the reason why we don't do that is because we don't have a metric to sort of calculate it, right? Like, say you have like one of your team members sort of like flying out, taking out your annual leave, but get your work done before that. The kind of like progress and the results and the efficiency in them coming back, knowing that, hey, you know what, I can trust like my leader, and I know I'm in good hands, and I just sort of like have to do that. So that there's no sort of like metric to sort of like calculate that. But I feel like that is so very important, as equally as important as it is for you, like your other verticals in the business as well. So when you were talking, that was something that passed through my mind, and I thought I should definitely sort of like share that insight as well. So yeah, moving on to the next, I was just wondering, how do you sort of like, what's your perspective or like your recommendation with respect to organizations prioritizing their investments, right? Keeping in mind that they have like limited resources, or like they have like a competing growth opportunity out there. So like, what would you sort of like recommend, or your perspective on that?
So what I love about this is, in difficult times, the answer is usually incredibly obvious, and it really simplifies your decision-making structure, because you have very limited choices, and it usually comes down to something like surviving, paying salaries, finding that extra customer, or finding the investor, and your competing challenges pale in comparison to those. So for startups, the challenge is usually, or the decision is usually relatively clear. And if it isn't, it should certainly be aligned to, the North Star. So for me, I'm always looking for what my North Star is, whether that's my immediate North Star or my 3-year North Star. And usually it boils down to, what do I need to look like in 3 years for my next funding round? Do I need to be profitable? what do I need to look like in 3 years or 5 years for an exit, and the timeline therein. So when you have competing priorities, I like to step back, slow down, and say, well, what are we solving for? What is our North Star? Are we a Series A business and we need to get to B? B, we have runway for 24 months. Okay, so we have 18 months to get to the position we need to be in to be a Series B business. And what does that look like? Is that customer acquisition? Is that geographical expansion? Is it profitability? Is it revenue if you're pre-revenue? And those things are your North Star, and then you have to solve everything for that. Nothing else matters. You simplify, particularly as a startup. Now, that North Star has changed in the last 12 months. The interest rate environment, the VCs, the lack of funding, the slowdown, that shift has changed more to profitability or survivability. So your North Star has changed. But it's still a North Star, so you know what you need to be solving for. And if you know that really solves that question of where do I put my resources, where do I put my growth up, what growth opportunities do I focus on? And lots of companies today are looking at, do we double down on our current market, or do we look to expand into a new market? And you really have to not answer that in isolation. You have to answer that relative to whatever your North Star is, and which one gets you there quicker and creates a better picture by the time you come to reaching that North Star.
Awesome. So Rob, I think we have a question from Rohit, and he says, is there any role for AI in your organization, as it would reduce your cost overall? As AI, if well programmed, it would make things easy and more transparent.
Yeah, AI is the best tool ever. I use it every day, from drafting or improving my emails to a whole host of other things. For us as an organization, we've implemented an AI tool for our customer base. With regards to, we also sell insurance and a HR platform, and on our insurance product, we have created an AI tool that sits on top of our insurance knowledge database, so you can query it in a natural language way. And it's a super impressive tool because insurance benefits networks are relatively complex, but our AI tool creates a much easier way to do that for our customer base. Take that and apply that to finance, and in the future, I hope to put an AI tool on top of our finance database, on top of our accounting system, so that we can ask it natural language questions. What does my accounts payable look like for the next 6 months? What was my receivables on this single product in this market for the last 6 months look like? Can you extrapolate that and give me a forecast for the next 3 months or 6 months? And I think that's the next place that AI goes, is when we can really put it on top of our internal data sets and ask it natural language questions, which produce results within minutes. And that changes, or that really enhances, our ability to provide analysis and insights. If I sit down with my FP&A senior manager today and we ask questions, we have to take 24 or 48 hours to run the numbers to be able to come back and then look at that. If we can sit that AI tool on top of that data set and ask the AI tool to run the analysis, which is the low value part, because the value adding part is the decision making and the next steps as a result of that data, and that is incredibly powerful. And that's something I hope we can look at in the next 6 and 12 months. And that really steps forward finance, light years.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Rob. And please feel free to sort of bring in more questions if the audience has any. And also, Rob, before that, we were just talking about balancing growth and profitability, right? So I was sort of thinking on these lines. So when you are evaluating going into new markets, so we discussed earlier, right? So now Bezat sort of trying to expand into Saudi Arabia and stuff like that. So what are some of the factors that you would take into consideration today that you would sort of assess before you sort of want to move into new markets? So that's something that I was also wanting to was kind of curious about.
Yeah, so before you even enter a new market like Saudi, for us it goes back to our North Star. What are we solving for, and how does expansion in our existing market or in a new market fit into that North Star? And for us, the answer was Saudi. In terms of our next steps, it gave us access to a huge developing market. I think, it's a natural next step at the moment in the Middle East to move from the UAE, one of the more developed markets, into Saudi, which is aggressively expanding and developing and regulating itself, which presents a huge amount of opportunities for players already established here. On top of that, the Saudi market is relatively similar here, and that's important. So the similarities between both jurisdictions are good. It makes it easier for us to get in, but it is not the same. And I think that's one of the most important things to remember when you're expanding into a new market. No matter how similar, symbiotic they might be, they are different. And there are nuances to the local cultures and markets and regulations and compliance. So we have 30 to 40 people on the ground in Saudi. The leadership team spends a lot of time there on a frequent basis, because we don't know what we don't know, and we need to figure that out. We've seen, on the finance side, payment methodologies are very different. Checks are still very prevalent in the UAE. They are non-existent in Saudi. However, which is beneficial, and bank transfers are more prevalent. However, getting payment on time is more challenging in Saudi, and we didn't fully understand that or appreciate that when we entered the market. So we're having to refine our processes around collections and hiring more finance people on the ground to make that more sustainable. So entering a new market is about your North Star, understanding how easy, in inverted commas, that is to enter, given its similarities to your existing market, because then it's easier to lift and plant your product with fewer localization tweaks required, but some are still required ultimately. And then the final piece is understanding how the local market operates. Those are some of the most important pieces about entering. If you have decided to enter a new market, entering a new market.
Makes sense. Rob, you've been mentioning a couple of times about identifying the North Star, right? So just out of curiosity, I wanted to understand, what is the thought process that goes into sort of identifying this one? The reason why I'm asking you this is because obviously, with respect to our topic itself in rapidly changing times, so there is going to be sort of some sort of change in the structure with respect to the North Star. I do understand that we have an ideal goal and we want to aim towards it. But with respect to multiple things changing around us in today's world, how do we sort of keep that North Star part intact? And how are we sort of moving towards it with multiple different environmental changes coming our way?
So the North Star doesn't really change, and I think that's really important to remember. So if you're a Series B, your North Star is 99% going to be getting to your Series A, you're not 99% North Star is getting to a Series B. What changes is your path. And I think that's really important to remember, right? So all the variables that are moving in the market at the moment change your path to B, or your timeline. So if we think about the last 18 months, people were in a good place, the market was going well, VCs were still investing, so your Series B was in a good place. As long as your metrics were driving towards what's required for a Series B. Then the world shifted on its axis. We have a super high interest rate environment. VCs have tightened up. So accessing that Series B capital has changed, but you're still heading towards the Series B. It's just that now you might need to show ability to convert customers to revenue quicker. You might need to show your ability to start producing some level of profit, or certainty, or relative certainty of path to profitability in 6 to 12 months. That is more conservative and therefore more certain than otherwise would be required, because the metrics of assessment from the VC community have changed from growth to profit, or path to profitability. So I really think that the North Star will remain consistent. If you're a Series C, D, or E and you're looking for that exit, that still remains the same. It's just how you're getting there, and the journey you're taking and the timeline you're taking probably changes.
No, that makes sense. Absolutely. I think we have another question relating to the AI question that was asked earlier. So it goes, would you give an option in the future to your customers if they want an AI produced results, or is it still going to be experienced human produced results?
Results, kind of trying to figure that out. I
I'm
think,
guessing it's a very, yeah. Sorry, you were saying.
yeah, no, it's okay. I'm assuming with regards to the questions, when I
Mm-hmm.
gave an example of the insurance piece.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so the way our AI tool works today is it sits as an additional feature to the data
Mm-hmm.
that we have. So you can access your table of benefits, dig through the insurance documentation and find your answer. We have done a lot of work previously to AI to make
Mm-hmm.
that easier. We still have to go through it. So I think we have options. You don't have to just take the AI tool because AI can be wrong, as we've seen many times on ChatGPT and examples online. So if you want to ask ChatGPT in a natural language, or not ChatGPT, our AI tool in a natural language way, you can. It's easy, and if the answer is what you need, you're good to go. And if you don't like it, or you don't trust it for some reason, or you don't want to use it on our platform, you can go through the old school way, I guess, and find the answer yourself.
That makes sense, I guess. Um, awesome. So just moving on to my next questions. How would do you think, or rather recommend, that CFOs sort of like balance growth and profitability, right? Like whether it's coming from a place of culture, or if it's coming from like sort of like a place of sustainability. Like how do we sort of like have that balance in today's world?
And it comes back to what we were talking about in the previous
Mm,
around growth opportunities in new markets.
mm-hmm,
It depends where you want to end up and what you're solving for.
mm,
But I think ultimately your ability to solve for either growth or profitability actually comes down to the team you've created and the environment you have. If
mm-hmm,
you have, and particularly at the moment when companies are pivoting very aggressively from one to the other,
mm,
having the right team, the right people, the right
mm-hmm,
culture that supports and drives that direction is incredibly important.
mm,
Without it, you're at risk of not being able to pivot well enough or quickly enough.
mm,
I think where you see that is churn, right? Employee churn. When a big strategic decision is made and there's a big change in direction from growth to, say, profitability, you see people leave because they don't believe in it, it's not communicated correctly, or they don't believe in the mission enough to stay. But if you have a team that is embedded and built into the business and believes in what you're doing, and you've created that environment and also that trust, then a pivot is very possible because they get it. They understand that you're communicating it. They see it coming, so that when you're trying to shift that balance, that shift is very easy. The whole team moves with you. Whereas if you're an organization of one leader and many, many
mm,
followers, you have to drag people with you, and that's more time consuming. Then when you get churn, you have to take new people in on board them. That slows your pivot down.
mm-hmm,
So, you know, balancing that shift actually stems from the work you've done building your organization in the right way.
mm,
So that when you need to be flexible and agile, you can, because the whole business understands and moves with you.
mm. No, that makes sense. Absolutely. Rob, just to move on to like a lighter note, some I just want to reflect something on your personal side, right? Like, what is that sort of like that one habit that you follow that sort of like helps you both just in your mental space of mind right before you get into work, or like helps you on a professional level, right? It can be like a habit, or like sort of like a routine, or something that you follow, something that you really like doing. Just like sort of like, you mentioned a couple of minutes back about how you like to just wake up every day to that challenge or that problem of being like a CFO for startup. So what is like that one habit that you really like look forward to doing, or like a routine or anything on those lines?
Yeah, well, waking up to that challenge every day can wear you down a little bit as well. So it's not every day I jump out of bed and I'm fully like in the movies. So for me, to make sure I reset myself, I have to have
Mm-hmm.
exercise, and it's hard when the going is hard in the business to find that
Mm-hmm.
energy. I have mental fights half an hour before I go to the gym every morning, but afterwards I'm more thankful than ever that I did.
Mhm.
And even saying this tomorrow morning, I will still have that mental fight to make sure I go to the gym. And it's
Of course.
become even harder. I have a 3-month-old daughter now, so getting that energy again is harder again.
Of course.
But doing it is the best thing I do for both me and for my team, because
Mm.
I'm a better person when I've exercised.
Mhm.
The team know when I don't exercise, I'm grumpier, I'm less quick on my feet, and it's obvious. But when I force myself into the gym, I feel 100 times better for it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree to that as well because I know the days, and my team also knows the days that I haven't really like worked out or exercised in the morning because I'm like really groggy and like, you're not having that sort of clarity. I think
Yep.
it's really that sort of like that endorphin hit that you get in the morning that sort of like keeps you going through the day. I think that's so very well said, Rob. Yeah, I guess we're almost coming towards the end of the webinar, and I think this is something that everybody would want to know is that during these rapidly changing times, right? So, what would be that sort of one takeaway or rather advice that you would want to give aspiring financial leaders or financial leaders in today's world from your perspective and your experience?
It's almost like full circle. It goes back to what I said at the very, very start. Listen,
Mm,
listen, and listen more. Be the last to
mm,
speak. Have an opinion, have a voice, but listen more than you speak, which
mm,
is so hard. I get it. I struggle with it every day, but the more you exercise that muscle, the better you become at it. When you listen, you understand the business more, you understand your team more, you understand your own thought
mm,
processes more. As a leader, you have to recognize you're the conductor of an orchestra. You are not the orchestra.
mm,
You are not creating the music. You are simply
mm.
helping to direct it. And the more you listen to what's being produced, the better you can dial it in, and dial yourself in. And good leaders listen more than they speak.
We have one more question. If we have time to take that, Rob, is that all right?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, it says, in terms of sustainability, when the organization was founded at 2013, does the organization follow the 3 Ps? And now, is there a 4th P? Does the organization follow that? And how did it charter the organization's path?
Um, I would say that in terms of sustainability, we have some way to go.
Mm,
So I think when you recognize that you're building a business that focuses on building and sustainability in terms of that environmental stuff comes perhaps secondary to the growth and the survivability and the success of a business. But as we've grown as a business to 350 people spread across multiple countries, our kind of sustainability across our social aspect is incredibly important. We work with the team, we spend time on that, but at times that shifts, depending on what's happening in the market. And for us, right now, like most startups, it's a tough time out there with funding. So the shifts more to focusing on the funding and that direction and that North Star. And then when the good times come back eventually around, then the shifts can come back more to the sustainability piece. So it's a moving feast, and I think we're probably more on the growth and the profit side and more focused on the pillars of sustainability, but hopefully we'll come back more to that in the future.
awesome. I hope that answers the question. Anyway, thank you. Thank you so much, Rob, for joining us today. And I personally enjoyed your perspective on the topic as well. And yeah, I hope we connect in the future soon for many more of these opportunities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sheethal. Pleasure to be here.